Hello and welcome everyone. Thank you very much for tuning in. This is Unit 1, Lesson 5, and this is the part of the lesson that has your notes. In today's lesson, we're going to talk about the fundamentals of government, like the actual specific things that make a government a government. What makes government run? What makes it function? What guiding rules do we have that help us and show us the way to a peaceful, orderly society? Let's get started. Before we do, please let me encourage you to make sure that you have your Google Doc open to today's lesson and that you're filling in the content for the guided notes section and answering any key concept questions that might appear on the way. Here we go. The foundations of government. The need for government. Government is an institution through which a society makes and enforces its public policies. It is made up of those people who exercise its powers and all those who have authority to control over people. Government enacts public policies. These are all the things the government decides to actually do, like taxation, defense, education, crime, healthcare, transportation, the environment, civil rights, and working conditions. As you can see, government oversees a lot, and we expect government to do a lot, as it should. Please realize that we also expect our elected officials to govern on behalf of us to make decisions that impact our everyday lives. There are basic powers of government. Every government must have at least 3 basic powers to carry out its public policies. The first is legislative power. This is the power to make laws. The second is executive power, the power to enforce or administer the laws. And the third is judicial power, the power to interpret laws and determine their meaning. As you can see, in many ways, these definitions define and describe the United States government, and this political cartoon basically conveys our 3 branches of government in this way. A government needs to have all these characteristics of a state. But what is a state? A state, in government terms, is the body of people living in a defined territory, organized politically, and with the power to make and enforce laws, without the consent of any high authority. This is often called a nation, or a country. When you think about it, the United States of America is the perfect example for a state, because we have all of these characteristics defined below. Population, or people. Territory, or defined borders. Sovereignty, which is basically admitting that government has absolute power and it's our territory. And a government, which is, of course, the institution of power through which citizens are ruled over. But how did governments emerge? How did states emerge? There are 4 basic theories that political scientists have when it comes to looking at governments. Force theory was the belief that one person or small group gained control over an area and then basically just forced all people within it to submit to the rule. So by force, people were at the mercy of their government. Another theory believes in the divine rights of kings, which is the theory that God created the state, and God had given those of royal birth the right to rule. If you think about old societies, many people believe that the anointed ones, by some divine force or entity, were the ones who were given the power to rule. There's evolutionary theory, which is the belief that a population formed first from primitive families. The heads of these families later became the government. And then there's the social contract theory. This is a population in a given territory that willingly gives up as much power to a government as needed to promote the well-being of all. Which of these theories best describes the origin of the United States and why? Here's the answer to that question. Get ready. Many people believe it's the social contract theory that defines and describes the United States government. Think about it. We as citizens demand things from government, and government demands things from us. But at the same time, we admit full well that we need government to rule and have dominion over us, so that we may live just and able lives. What else does government do? Here are a few purposes of government as outlined in the preamble of our Constitution. Let's recall from the first lesson that the Constitution is the document that has all of our rights and alludes to some of our responsibilities as able citizens. The Constitution says that a government should do the following: to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for a common defense, promote the general welfare, secure the blessings of liberty, and to promote patriotism. All of these reasons and more are basically themes that can be found in the Constitution and, of course, the governmental overarching runnings of our government. When you think about the way the government functions, it's pretty clear that these themes are repeated over and over again. So how does the government serve the purposes set forth in the preamble of the Constitution? Provide an example? For your notes, let's talk about it. Let's maybe go to establishing justice. The Constitution basically says that all Americans have access to justice. For example, in America, if you're ever accused of a crime, you have a right to have your trial heard by a jury and also to have a judge reside over your trial to determine the verdict. In many other countries around the world, they don't have this. If you're guilty, you're guilty, and that's it. Some of these other principles can be found as far as direct correlations to the Constitution still to this day. Let's now get to the main principles of government. For your notes, please still continue to fill in the content and answer any key concept questions that appear. These are the main things and factors that make government run. Popular sovereignty. The question here with this principle is, who ultimately gets the power in a government? The idea is that the source of government comes from the consent of the governed. In other words, people have to agree to listen to government to make it run. But people also still have the power to steer the ship of government, if you will. The idea that people hold the power in government is conveyed by the idea of popular sovereignty, and this is when people exercise the power to vote, or when people exercise the power of expression. That is power to the people right there. A more definite example would be conveyed right here. Let's just say that people in a country are not totally confident and sure about the course of the country in an election year. So what can they do? They can vote and exercise their right of expression to stay the course or make a change in leadership. Next, republicanism. The question here is, who gets to decide who rules in a government? The idea is that the right people need to be in charge of us to make decisions for us. Republicanism is basically the idea that people elect representatives for them to make laws for them. In a sense, we're handing over a lot of power and responsibility to our elected officials to make the best decisions for us, even though we may not know these people. Real-world example. The people of a country are active and caring citizens, but they admit they do not know at all about government affairs and making policies. So, what do? They put people in office to rule on their behalf and make decisions, just like this diagram shows. And then there's checks and balances. How can we keep a branch of government from becoming too powerful? The idea? Regulation and oversight of branches of government matters. We need to watch to make sure that every branch of government functions correctly and doesn't oversee its powers. Each branch of government has a way to limit the powers of the other two, at special times and special occasions especially. An example. Let's just say the President of the United States would like to see a certain set of laws passed on an issue that is really important to him or her. But they need Congress to actually pass the law, and the law needs to be upheld by the courts. As you can see by this diagram, that's exactly what happens in our government. Every branch needs each other, and in theory, no one branch is superior to another. Number 4, limited government. How much power is too much power in a government? The idea is that no government should be all-powerful, omniscient, and almighty. In other words, everyone must follow the law, and the government is not all-powerful. We live in a society where, generally speaking, people and the individual have basic rights and dignity that is honored. An example? People believe that government is imposing a lot of harsh restrictions during the pandemic, but people are willing to abide by the rules as to create a just and orderly society. They keep a watchful eye on government, though. So what do people do? They stay informed. They do their research. They advocate for their rights whenever they feel like they're being infringed. However, people are willing to go along with the rules in place set forth by the government so as if not to dissolve it to total anarchy. Number 5, individual rights. How can individuals live in a government? The idea? Each person should have certain inalienable rights. Basically, citizens are given inalienable rights that cannot be taken away without a trial. This is an important concept because in some countries around the world, your rights are whatever the current leader decides what they are. And if there's a change in personnel or regime, then those rights could change, and your liberties could change with them. An example: people in the United States want to see if they can advocate for rights of unborn babies and protest against abortion. So what can people do? They can lobby politicians, petition, protest for greater awareness on this action, and bring about action on this issue. Next is separation of powers. Who does what in a government? The idea is that if we allocate the duties and responsibilities, no one source could or should have to do it all. The central government is separated into 3 different branches, and each have different jobs but equal power. Let's recall that the legislative makes the laws, the executive enforces, and the judicial judges the laws. An example of this: the U.S. Congress would like to see if they can change a part of the U.S. Constitution. So what do they have to do? Well, a long process of judicial review has to take place, and votes by all levels of government must take place. And then, of course, we have to then modify the Constitution the right way. It's happened before, and it could likely happen again. And 7, federalism. What level of government acts on certain issues at certain times? The idea? Different levels of government are active and have powers for certain roles. There are different levels of government that make up layers of our society. For example, we have federal government, state government, local government. They all share powers at times, and each has roles that they can fulfill at certain times too. Here's an example. Certain parts are impacted by a natural disaster. So what happens? Different layers of government can and will do different things to assist and help out. Certain powers and roles are activated immediately for the relief of Americans. So as you guys can see, those are some of the basic tenets that hold our government together. And in this way, we as a democratic society are guaranteed our rights as citizens, and government, as our trusted representatives and officials, rule, but rule fairly in an open and just society. Thank you very much for tuning in. And remember, please finish the rest of your notes and, of course, the lesson accordingly.